Welcome to a journey through time, a story etched in the shifting sands of the Arabian desert. Imagine a city that glitters like a mirage, a place where steel and glass towers pierce the clouds, and man-made islands in the shape of palm trees bloom from the turquoise waters of the Persian Gulf. This is Dubai, a metropolis that seems to have sprung fully formed from the imagination, a testament to ambition on a scale that defies belief. It's a city that boasts the tallest building in the world, the Burj Khalifa, soaring over 828 meters, or more than 2,700 feet, into the sky. But was this futuristic marvel truly born overnight? How did a quiet coastal settlement, a place of pearl divers and fishermen huddled around a saltwater creek, transform itself into one of the world's most dazzling and dynamic hubs of commerce and tourism? The answer is a tale of vision, of survival, of bold gambles, and of a relentless drive to build the future. We are going to travel back through the centuries, long before the oil, the skyscrapers, and the global headlines, to discover the true story of Dubai, from its humble beginnings to its spectacular rise. It's a story that connects people and places across the globe. And speaking of which, we'd love to know where our story is reaching you today. Take a moment to write in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's always fascinating to see how far these tales can travel. And if you enjoy journeys like this one, make sure to subscribe to our channel so you'll be the first to know when we release new stories from history's most fascinating chapters. Now, let us begin. Let us travel back to where it all started, to the lifeblood of this desert land, the creek. Our story begins not with glass or steel, but with water and mud. Long before Dubai was a name whispered with awe in the boardrooms and holiday brochures of the world, its destiny was being carved by a gentle, unassuming inlet of the sea. This was the core Dubai, the Dubai Creek, a saltwater artery that pushed its way into the heart of the arid land. For millennia, this region was not the welcoming landscape we know today. Thousands of years ago, around 5,000 years before the Common Era, the coastline sat further inland, and the area where a great city would one day stand was a vast and impenetrable mangrove swamp, a humid, tangled wilderness teeming with life but hostile to human settlement. The great forces of nature were at work, and as the millennia passed, the seas slowly retreated, leaving behind a coastline of salt flats and sand. The swamp dried, the land hardened, and a new landscape emerged, one that was barren and yet held a secret promise. This promise was the creek, a natural harbor extending inland for nearly 15 kilometers, a little over 9 miles. Its calm waters sheltered from the temperamental currents of the Persian Gulf. It was a sanctuary waiting for its people. The first people to truly know this land were wanderers, masters of the desert. They were nomadic herders of the Bronze Age, people who moved with the seasons in a timeless rhythm dictated by the search for water and grazing land for their camels, sheep, and goats. Archaeological discoveries at sites like Al-Ashush have revealed their ancient footprints, telling a story of a hardy and resilient culture that thrived in an environment that would seem impossible to many. Their world was one of immense, stark beauty. The endless sweep of ochre dunes, the blazing sun that could heat the air to a scorching 45 degrees Celsius, a searing 113 degrees Fahrenheit, and the profound, silent chill of the desert night. They read the stars for navigation and understood the subtle language of the sands. Their wealth was not in gold, but in their livestock, and their sustenance came from the date palm, a tree they called the Blessed Tree, for every part of it, from its fruit to its fronds, gave them life. They possessed a deep and intimate knowledge of the arid terrain, knowing the location of every hidden well and seasonal oasis. But the creek offered something different, not just a temporary stop, but a place of permanence. Its waters were a constant, reliable source of abundance, teeming with fish that promised a life less reliant on the whims of the seasons. Slowly, over centuries, the attraction of this natural harbor began to change the ancient patterns of existence. Some of these nomadic families began to linger longer by the creek's shores, building temporary shelters from palm fronds, the barasti huts that would characterize the region's architecture for thousands of years. They would weave the dried leaves into panels for walls and roofs, creating homes that were remarkably well suited to the climate, allowing the breeze to filter through while providing shade from the relentless sun. They began to divide their lives between the sea and the land. They learned to build simple boats, abras, from which they could cast nets into the creek's generous waters. They discovered the riches that lay beneath the surface of the Gulf itself, the pearl oyster beds. For a time, it was a dual existence, with some family members taking the herds into the desert interior, while others remained on the coast, harvesting the sea. A small, nascent community began to form on the southern bank of the creek, in the area that would one day be known as Bur Dubai. It was not yet a town, merely a collection of huts, a place where the scent of drying fish and the salt of the sea hung heavy in the air. Yet, this was no isolated backwater. The people of this region were part of a larger, more sophisticated world than one might imagine. During the Bronze Age, this land was part of a territory known to the powerful Sumerian civilization of Mesopotamia as Magan. The Sumerians, in what is modern-day Iraq, wrote on clay tablets of the ships of Magan, which brought them copper and diorite, a hard black stone, essential for their tools, weapons, and statues. For a long time, the exact location of Magan's industrial heart was a mystery, until a remarkable discovery was made far from the coast, at a place called Saruk al-Hadid, the Mountain of Iron. Here, in the middle of the desert, archaeologists uncovered a vast metallurgical center that had been active for thousands of years. They found tons of metal slag, the waste product of smelting, and countless artifacts, perfectly crafted bronze arrowheads, daggers, axe heads, and even intricate gold jewelry, including a beautiful ring depicting a wildcat that would one day become the emblem of the Dubai Expo. This was not the work of a simple fishing village. It was evidence of a highly organized industrial operation. The people of this land were not just herders and fishermen. They were skilled miners, metallurgists, and artisans. They were trading partners with the great civilizations of their time, exporting their manufactured goods across the sea. The Dubai Creek, as the closest and most viable port to Saruk al-Hadid, would have been the crucial gateway for this ancient trade, the channel through which the copper and bronze of Magan flowed out to the world, and through which goods from Mesopotamia, Persia, and perhaps even the distant Indus Valley flowed back in. Life, however, was still a daily struggle for survival, a delicate balance with a demanding environment. Fresh water, the most precious of all commodities, was scarce. While the creek provided salt water and seafood, drinking water had to be laboriously drawn from wells, and its availability dictated the limits of settlement. The date palm groves, cultivated in nearby oases, were a vital source of nutrition, their sugary fruit providing a burst of energy in the intense heat. The sea gave them pearls, small, luminous treasures that held immense value in faraway lands. Men would spend the long, hot summer months out on the Gulf, diving to perilous depths with nothing more than a leather nose clip, a rope, and a basket. They would descend 30, even 40 feet, which is 12 meters, on a single breath, their lungs burning to collect the oysters from the seabed. It was a life of extreme hardship and danger, but it was a cornerstone of their economy. The small village on the banks of the Dubai Creek was thus built on a foundation of dates, fish, and pearls. It was a community defined by its dual identity, one foot planted firmly in the traditions of the desert, the other stepping into the waters of international trade. It was a tiny settlement, a mere pinprick on the vast map of the ancient world. But its position was strategic. It sat at a crossroads between the desert and the sea, between the resources of the land and the vast highways of maritime commerce. The foundations had been laid, not in concrete, but in the accumulated wisdom of generations who knew how to draw life from sand and sea. The stage was set, waiting for the arrival of the leaders who would take this humble settlement and, with audacious vision, begin its inexorable journey toward the city of the future. For centuries, the small settlement on the banks of the Dubai Creek existed in the shadow of its more powerful neighbors. The political landscape of the early 19th century along this stretch of the Arabian coast was a shifting mosaic of tribal alliances, rivalries, and maritime power. The British, seeking to protect their vital trade routes to India from piracy, had imposed a series of truces on the local sheikhdoms, giving the region its European name, the Trucial Coast. This was a world dominated by two major forces. In the north were the Al-Qasimi, a formidable maritime power based in Sharjah and Ras Al Khaimah, whose vast fleets controlled much of the trade and pearling in the southern Gulf. To the south lay the domain of the Bani Yas, a powerful tribal confederation whose heartland was the Liwa Oasis, deep in the desert, but whose political capital was the coastal settlement of Abu Dhabi. The Bani Yas, led by the Al Nahyan family, were the dominant land power, and Dubai, geographically nestled between these two spheres of influence, was little more than a dependency of Abu Dhabi, a minor outpost in a larger game of power. Within the bustling heart of Abu Dhabi, however, the seeds of change were being sown. The Bani Yas tribe was a large and complex entity, a federation of different clans and families, and like any great house, it was not immune to internal friction. The ruler at the time, Sheikh Khalifa bin Shahbut al Nahyan, governed his territory with a firm hand. But another influential figure was rising within the tribe's leadership, a man of vision and restless ambition named Maktoum bin Buti of the Al-Bu Falasa clan, a branch of the Bani Yas. Maktoum bin Buti saw the world through a different lens. He was a man who understood the sea, the flow of trade, and the immense wealth that could be generated from it. He watched as the pearling fleets brought riches into Abu Dhabi, but he felt that their potential was being constrained by the conservative, desert-oriented politics of the ruling family. A growing tension began to simmer between Sheikh Khalifa and Maktoum bin Bhutti, a fundamental disagreement not just of personality, but of vision. Maktoum envisioned a sheikhdom built purely on commerce, a place where trade was not just one part of the economy, but its very soul. He dreamed of a domain he could shape himself, a port that would be open to the world. This simmering discontent finally reached its boiling point in the year 1833. In a move of extraordinary boldness, a decision that would forever alter the course of the region's history, Maktoum bin Bhutti decided to break away. This was no simple departure. It was a schism, a calculated gamble to carve out an independent future. He would not leave alone. He gathered around him some 800 members of his Al-Bu Falasa clan, a significant portion of the tribe, representing men, women, and children who were willing to stake their entire existence on his vision. They prepared for a mass exodus, a migration that was a profound act of defiance against the established order. They packed their few possessions, gathered their herds, and prepared their boats. Their destination was the small, strategically located, and politically sleepy village of Dubai, a little over 120 kilometers, or about 75 miles, up the coast. It was a place with a magnificent natural harbor, the creek, but without the political weight to resist a determined new leadership. Maktoum bin Bhutti did not see Dubai for what it was, a minor dependency, but for what it could be, the perfect, unclaimed foundation upon which to build his commercial dream. The journey itself was a spectacle of determination. A flotilla of dhows, the traditional wooden sailing vessels of the Gulf, hoisted their lateen sails, their timbers groaning as they caught the coastal winds. On their decks were families, their life's belongings bundled in cloth, the children looking out at the endless turquoise water, leaving the only home they had ever known. Parallel to the boats, a caravan moved across the arid coastal plain, a slow-moving river of camels and people, their figures shimmering in the relentless heat of the Arabian sun. They were marching towards an uncertain future, leaving behind the security and power of Abu Dhabi for the promise of autonomy in a smaller, less developed settlement. When this great migration finally arrived at the mouth of the Dubai Creek, the sight must have been astonishing to the few hundred inhabitants already living there. The village they found was a humble affair, a collection of barasti huts clustered along the shoreline of the Bur Dubai Peninsula, with a small souk, a marketplace, and a modest fort, the Al-Fahidi Fort, built of coral block and gypsum mortar. The takeover was swift, decisive, and remarkably bloodless. Maktoum bin Bhutti did not arrive as a conqueror, with sword drawn, but as a new reality that could not be denied. The sheer force of his following, 800 strong, simply dwarfed the existing population. There was no battle, no resistance. The transfer of power was a simple fact on the ground. The headman of the village was in no position to object, and the arrival of so many new people, skilled in the arts of pearling and trade, likely seemed more of an opportunity than a threat to the residents. With his people settled, Maktoum bin Buti made a declaration that rang out across the Trucial coast. Dubai was now independent. It would no longer pay tribute to Abu Dhabi. The Al Maktoum dynasty had been established, and the history of modern Dubai had begun. Maktoum bin Buti immediately set to work, proving that his vision was more than just a fleeting dream. He understood that the creek was his greatest asset. It was a perfect, sheltered port, deep enough to accommodate the ocean-going dhows that were the lifeblood of regional trade. He focused all his energy on fostering commerce. He strengthened the pearling industry, organizing the fleets, and ensuring that Dubai became a primary center for the buying and selling of the lustrous gems. He cultivated relationships with the Persian merchants from the other side of the Gulf and with Indian traders, understanding that Dubai's prosperity depended not on what it could produce from the land, but on what it could attract from the sea. He created an environment that was safe for merchants and their goods, establishing a reputation for the small sheikhdom as a reliable and business-friendly port. This was the foundational genius of the Al Maktoum, the recognition that in a land with few natural resources, the greatest resource of all was the free and secure flow of trade. The policy was simple but revolutionary. What was good for the merchant was good for Dubai. This principle, established in the very first days of Al Maktoum rule, would become the bedrock of Dubai's identity, a guiding philosophy that would be passed down from one generation of ruler to the next, echoing through the ages and eventually enabling the city's astonishing transformation. The arrival in 1833 was more than a migration. It was the planting of a seed of ambition in the soil of a quiet fishing village. It was an audacious gamble that paid off, setting in motion a chain of events that would see this tiny, independent sheikhdom defy its size and its environment to one day become a true crossroads of the world. Under the astute, trade-focused leadership of the Al Maktoum dynasty, Dubai did not just survive, it began to thrive, and its fortunes became inextricably linked to a tiny, lustrous orb brought forth from the depths of the sea. This was the Age of Pearl, a period stretching from the late 19th century into the first decades of the 20th, when the economic, social, and cultural life of the town revolved entirely around the perilous but profitable harvest of the pearl oyster. The pearls of the Persian Gulf were legendary, prized for their unique luminescence and warm, silvery pink hue, a quality unmatched by pearls from any other sea. In the grand jewelry houses of Paris, London, and New York, and in the opulent courts of Indian Maharajas, these gems were the ultimate symbol of wealth and status. And for a fleeting, golden era, the bustling, sun-scorched town of Dubai became one of the world's most important centers for this precious commodity. Its souks, a critical link in a global chain of luxury that began in the crushing depths of the sea and ended on the velvet cushions of Cartier and Boucheron. The entire rhythm of life in Dubai was dictated by the pearling season, known as al-Gaus, as the punishing heat of summer descended upon the coast, pushing the temperature well past 40 degrees Celsius, a stifling 104 degrees Fahrenheit. The town would begin to empty. This was when the waters of the Gulf were at their warmest and calmest, ideal conditions for the long, arduous months of diving. A vast fleet, numbering at its peak over 300 dhows and bombs from Dubai alone, carrying more than 7,000 men, would prepare for the great departure. The scene on the creek was one of organized chaos and poignant farewells. The air would be thick with the smell of tarred boat hulls, spices, and cooking fires. Families would gather on the shore to say goodbye to their husbands, sons, and brothers, knowing they would not see them again for up to 4 months. It was a time of immense hope, for a good season could bring prosperity, but also of deep anxiety, for the dangers were real, and many men would not return. Then, with the rising tide, the great lateen sails would be unfurled, and the fleet would move out of the creek as one, a forest of masts and canvas sailing towards the horizon and the rich oyster beds, known as the Hayrat. Life aboard a pearling vessel was a world of its own, a floating microcosm of hardship, discipline, and unwavering routine. Conditions were incredibly Spartan. The men were packed onto the wooden decks with no shelter from the blistering sun, their only provisions being sacks of rice, baskets of dates, and skins of precious fresh water. Their diet at sea was a monotonous but life-sustaining mix of fish caught from the side of the boat, a little rice, and the energy-giving dates. At the heart of this floating world was the diver, the Gais. His was a life of silent endurance and immense physical strain. Long before sunrise, the day would begin with the call to prayer, followed by a small meal of coffee and dates. As the sun's first rays touched the water, the work would commence. The diver wore no special equipment, no breathing apparatus. His only tools were a set of simple yet essential items. He would clip a photum made of turtle shell or wood onto his nose to seal his nostrils. Around his neck, he wore a woven bag, the die-in, to hold the oysters he collected. He would place one foot into a rope loop attached to a heavy stone, the hajar, and with a final deep breath, he would signal to his partner on deck, the saib, or tender, to release the rope. He would then plummet into the silent, blue-green depths, descending as far as 12 or even 15 meters, which is nearly 50 feet, the weight pulling him swiftly to the seabed. Down in the twilight world of the ocean floor, under immense pressure, he would work with frantic speed, scanning the seabed for the glint of oyster shells, tearing them from the rocks and stuffing them into his bag. He had only a minute, perhaps a minute and a half at most, before his burning lungs would force him to act. When he could endure it no longer, he would tug sharply on his second rope, his lifeline held by the saib, who would begin hauling him back to the surface with all his strength. The diver would break the surface, gasping for air, his body aching, and deposit his meager catch on the deck before preparing for the next descent. This grueling cycle would be repeated 50, sometimes 60 times a day, from sunrise until the call for evening prayer at sunset. The dangers were constant. Sharks and barracudas patrolled these waters. Venomous stonefish and sea snakes lurked among the rocks, and jellyfish could inflict agonizing stings. The constant pressure changes took a terrible toll on the divers' bodies, leading to hearing loss, respiratory illnesses, and skin diseases from the searing salt. This brutal labor was the foundation of a complex economic system. The entire operation was financed by merchants known as the tawash, who would often own the boats and provide the nakuda, the captain, with the supplies and money needed for the voyage. In return, the captain was obligated to sell his entire season's catch to that merchant. The divers themselves were almost always in a state of debt, having taken advances to support their families during their long absence. This system, while providing a necessary structure, often trapped the divers in a cycle of poverty, where no matter how hard they worked or how rich the harvest, their share was often just enough to pay off last year's debt and take on a new one for the next. At the end of the season, a day of joyous return, known as the Kuffel, the fleet would sail back into the Dubai Creek. The entire town would erupt in celebration, with women and children lining the banks, singing and waving as they welcomed their men home. It was then that the true business began. The oysters that had been collected and piled on the decks throughout the voyage would be opened. The anticipation was palpable as each shell was prized apart. Most contained nothing but meat, but some would hold a pearl. The sight of a perfect, large, lustrous pearl could make an entire season's hardship worthwhile. These pearls were then taken to the bustling souks of Bur Dubai and Dera. Here, in the narrow, shaded alleyways, the tawash would sit cross-legged in their small shops, their scales and sieves ready. They would pour the pearls onto red cloth trays, sorting them by size, shape, color, and luster, their eyes and fingers expertly judging the value of each gem. News of a particularly fine pearl would travel fast, attracting wealthy merchants from India, Persia, and even agents from the great European jewelers. The deals were struck over tiny cups of cardamom-scented coffee, with hushed negotiations and subtle hand gestures. The wealth generated by this trade transformed Dubai. The modest barasti huts of the fishermen and divers began to be overshadowed by the grand courtyard houses of the pearl merchants. Built from blocks of sea coral and gypsum, these homes were designed for the climate, featuring the iconic wind towers, the bargeal, which cleverly funneled the slightest breeze down into the rooms below, providing a natural form of air conditioning. The souk expanded. The creek was dredged to allow more and larger boats to anchor. And under the watchful eyes of the Al Maktoum rulers, Dubai cemented its reputation as the premier pearl trading hub of the Trucial Coast. A free port with low taxes, reliable security, and a culture that understood and welcomed international commerce. For a brief, shining moment in history, the fortunes of a global luxury industry rested on the strained lungs and calloused hands of the divers of Dubai, and the city they built from the wealth they brought up from the sea was a testament to their incredible sacrifice. The prosperity built on the backs of the pearl divers was dazzling, but it was also fragile, as delicate as the gems themselves. For a few glorious decades, Dubai existed in a confident bubble of wealth, a bustling center of commerce where fortunes were made and lost on the luster of a pearl. The wind towers of the merchants' houses stood like monuments to this success, and the creek bustled with the constant traffic of dhows. It seemed as if this golden age would last forever, that the bounty of the sea was infinite. But halfway across the world, in a laboratory in Japan, a single man was perfecting a technique that would shatter this illusion and bring the entire edifice of Dubai's economy to its knees. His name was Kokichi Mikimoto, and his invention, the cultured pearl, was an economic tsunami heading directly for the shores of the Persian Gulf. For centuries, the allure of the natural pearl lay in its rarity, the result of a chance intrusion of an irritant into an oyster shell. Mikimoto's genius was to remove chance from the equation. By surgically inserting a tiny bead of shell into a living oyster, he could coax the creature into coating the foreign body with layers of lustrous nacre, effectively creating a perfectly round, beautiful pearl on demand. By the late 1920s, his methods were perfected, and the first wave of these flawless, affordable cultured pearls began to flood the international markets. At first, the merchants of Dubai paid them little mind. They were imitations. They scoffed, lacking the soul, the baraka of a true pearl, brought up from the depths by the courage of a diver. But the global market, especially in the midst of the Great Depression, disagreed. Why would a Parisian socialite or a New York banker pay a fortune for a natural pearl when they could buy a string of cultured pearls, visually identical to the naked eye, for a fraction of the price? The effect was not instantaneous, but it was catastrophic. It began as a trickle. Merchants returning from trading voyages to Bombay, the main clearinghouse for Gulf pearls, reported lower prices. The following season, the prices were lower still. Within a decade, the market had completely collapsed. The value of natural pearls, the sole pillar of Dubai's economy, plummeted by over 90%. The news rippled through the souks of Bur Dubai and Deira like a death knell. The once bustling pearl exchanges fell silent. The red cloth trays lay empty. The delicate brass scales used for weighing the precious gems gathered dust. Wealth that had taken generations to build evaporated in a single season. Merchants who had commanded vast fortunes found themselves holding stocks of pearls that were now virtually worthless. Their grand coral block houses fell into disrepair, the wind towers standing as silent, lonely sentinels over a city gripped by economic paralysis. The impact on the divers and the wider community was even more devastating. For them, there was no financial cushion. Their entire existence was predicated on the next season, the next advance from the boat captain. With the industry gone, there was no next season. The great purling dhows, the pride of the Dubai fleet, were pulled ashore and left to bleach and crack under the merciless sun, their timbers rotting, their sails furled for a final time. The thousands of men who had known no other life, whose bodies were scarred by the rigors of the sea, were left with no work and no prospects. The entire social fabric, woven around the rhythms of the pearling season, was torn asunder. Families went hungry. The vibrant, hopeful energy of the town was replaced by a quiet, gnawing despair. Dubai, which had risen so high on the Pearl, was now facing utter ruin. In this dark hour, the city's leadership proved its worth. The ruler, Sheikh Saeed bin Maktoum al Maktoum, who had reigned since 1912, was a wise and steady presence. He had already demonstrated a shrewd understanding of commerce years earlier. When the Persian government had imposed heavy taxes on its merchants, Sheikh Saeed had seized the opportunity, offering tax exemptions and protection to any trader who would relocate their business to Dubai. Many had accepted, moving their families and their capital across the Gulf, further bolstering Dubai's status as a regional trading hub. This influx had created a more diverse merchant class and a more resilient economy than some of its neighbors. It was a lifeline, but it was not enough to counter the sheer scale of the pearling disaster. The city was dying, and a more radical solution was needed. The true architect of Dubai's rebirth was Sheikh Saeed's son, Sheikh Rashid bin Saeed Al Maktoum. Sheikh Rashid was a man of boundless energy and visionary foresight, a leader who did not see the world as it was, but as it could be. He had grown up in the world of the Pearl, but he was not bound by it. He spent his days not in the ruler's palace, but walking the narrow alleyways of the souks, sitting with the merchants, talking to the captains of the dhows, listening to the fishermen. He understood with absolute clarity that Dubai's greatest asset had never truly been the pearls. It had been the creek. The creek was the artery, the gateway, the deep, sheltered harbor that had first attracted his ancestors. Yet now, this very artery was becoming clogged. Decades of silt, carried in by the tide, were slowly but surely choking the waterway. The channel was becoming shallower with each passing year. Larger, modern vessels, the new generation of diesel-powered cargo dhows, found it increasingly difficult to enter, often having to anchor far out in the Gulf and transfer their goods to smaller, lighter boats. A slow and costly process. Some were getting stuck in the mud at low tide, a humiliating and visible symbol of the city's growing stagnation. Sheikh Rashid saw an existential threat. A port that could not welcome ships was no longer a port. He knew that if Dubai was to have a future, it had to be as the premier trading hub in the region, an entrepot that could handle any ship and any cargo. The pearling industry was dead, but the business of trade itself could be their salvation. And for that to happen, the creek had to be saved. The solution he proposed was audacious, almost unthinkable for a sheikhdom in such dire financial straits. He wanted to dredge the Dubai Creek. This would be a massive, modern engineering project, requiring foreign expertise and heavy machinery. And most daunting of all, it would require a colossal amount of money. The estimated cost was an astronomical 400,000 British pounds, a sum that Dubai, with its treasury empty, simply did not possess. The proposal was met with widespread skepticism. Many of the older, more conservative merchants advised caution. It was too risky, they argued. Where would such a sum come from? To borrow that much would place Dubai in a position of crippling debt. If the project failed, or if the revitalized trade did not materialize as Rashid predicted, it would be the final, fatal blow. But Sheikh Rashid was relentless. He argued, cajoled, and persuaded. He painted a vivid picture of his vision: a deep, wide creek bustling with the largest ships from India, East Africa, and Persia, with modern concrete wharves and warehouses lining its banks. He convinced the leading merchants of Dubai, figures like the Al-Owais and Al-Ghurur families, to back his plan. But even their combined wealth was not enough. The major British-run banks of the era refused the loan, deeming the small, pearl-less sheikhdom too great a risk. Undeterred, Sheikh Rashid looked to his neighbors. He turned to the ruler of Kuwait, Sheikh Abdullah al-Salim al-Sabah, whose nation was already benefiting from the early booms of the oil age. In a masterful act of diplomacy and persuasion, built on mutual trust and a shared vision for the future of the Gulf, Sheikh Rashid secured the massive loan. It was the gamble of a lifetime, staking the entire future of his city on borrowed money and a belief in the power of the creek. In 1959, the project began. A British engineering company, Overseas Ast, was brought in. The unfamiliar sights and sounds of heavy machinery filled the air. A powerful dredger began its slow, methodical work, scooping tons of silt and mud from the creek bed. The dredged material was not discarded, but was piled along the banks, reclaiming land and creating the foundations for the new wharves Sheikh Rashid had envisioned. For months, the work continued, deepening the channel to over 7 meters, about 23 feet, even at low tide. The moment the project was completed, Sheikh Rashid's vision was vindicated. The transformation was immediate and dramatic. Large cargo ships, some weighing up to 500 tons, could now sail directly into the heart of the city, regardless of the tide. They tied up at the newly reinforced banks, and goods were unloaded directly into the souks. The cost of shipping plummeted. The time it took to move cargo was slashed. Dubai instantly became the most efficient, cheapest, and busiest port in the entire region. Trade exploded. Merchants who had once favored other ports now flocked to Dubai. The souks, which had fallen silent after the pearl crash, were once again alive with the cacophony of commerce. But this time, the goods were different. Sacks of rice from India, textiles from Japan, electronics from Europe. Everything and anything was being bought and sold. Sheikh Rashid's great gamble had not only saved his city from oblivion, it had refounded it on a new, more durable foundation. He had transformed Dubai from a city dependent on a single, vulnerable luxury commodity into a diversified hub for the world's goods. This act of visionary leadership did more than just clear a channel for ships. It cleared the path for the future, building the robust infrastructure and the commercial mindset that would be perfectly poised to capitalize on the next great discovery that lay sleeping deep beneath the desert sands. Sheikh Rashid's audacious gamble on the Dubai Creek had paid off spectacularly. The waterway, now deep and wide, was a magnet for regional commerce, and the souks of Deira and Bur Dubai were once again humming with the vibrant energy of trade. Dubai had successfully navigated the catastrophic collapse of the pearling industry and reinvented itself as the most efficient and welcoming entrepot on the Trucial coast. Yet, despite this hard-won success, a shadow of insufficiency loomed. While Dubai was busy and prosperous by its own historical standards, its neighbors were being catapulted into a different dimension of wealth. All around them, the sands were yielding a different kind of treasure, a black, viscous liquid that was reshaping the global balance of power. Oil. In Abu Dhabi to the south, vast reserves had been discovered, and the once modest settlement was being transformed at a dizzying pace. In Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, the scale of the oil wealth was almost beyond comprehension, funding the creation of entire cities and welfare states overnight. Dubai, with its economy built on the thin margins of trade and re-export, began to feel like the poor cousin in a family of newfound billionaires. Sheikh Rashid watched this transformation with a keen and calculating eye. He celebrated his neighbor's good fortune, but he also felt a deep yearning for his own people to share in this bounty. He knew that trade alone, however successful, could not compete with the sheer financial power being unleashed by the oil wells. And so began the long, patient, and often frustrating search for oil in Dubai. As early as the 1930s, concessions had been granted to Western oil companies to explore the desert terrain. Teams of geologists arrived, bringing with them their mysterious charts and seismic equipment. They fanned out across the Emirates' territory, their convoys of trucks kicking up plumes of dust as they searched for the telltale geological formations that might trap a reservoir of oil. The process was painstakingly slow and ruinously expensive. Hopes would rise as a promising location was identified, and a massive drilling rig would be painstakingly erected under the searing sun. The drill would then bite into the earth, grinding its way down through thousands of feet of rock, a process that could take months. Time and again, the people of Dubai would wait and watch, only to hear the same disappointing news. The well was dry. The desert, it seemed, was not willing to give up its secrets easily. The search was a constant drain on the Emirates' modest treasury, a costly bet on a future that seemed to recede with every failed attempt. By the early 1960s, after numerous dry holes on land, the focus of the exploration shifted. Geologists began to suspect that if oil was to be found, it would be not under the sands of the desert, but beneath the seabed of the Persian Gulf. This was a far more complex and costly undertaking, requiring specialized offshore drilling platforms to be towed out and anchored in the open sea. It was a new frontier of technology and a massive financial risk. A new consortium, the Dubai Petroleum Company, took on the challenge. A site was identified some 95 kilometers, about 60 miles offshore. A giant floating oil rig named the Dubai Rig 1 was positioned. And once again, the drilling began. For 2 years, the work continued, far from the public eye, a silent, grinding effort out on the horizon. Then, in the summer of 1966, the news that Dubai had been praying for finally arrived. The drill had hit a reservoir. It was not a gusher on the scale of the giant Saudi fields, but it was significant, commercially viable, and it was theirs. The oil field was given a name that perfectly captured the sense of profound relief and gratitude that swept through the city. Fateh, the Arabic word for good fortune. The discovery of oil was a moment of pure euphoria. It was a vindication of Sheikh Rashid's persistence, a reward for decades of patience. But for Sheikh Rashid himself, this was not the finish line. It was the starting gun. He harbored no illusions about the nature of this newfound wealth. He saw it not as a permanent state of being, but as a fleeting opportunity. a finite gift from God that must be used with wisdom and incredible speed. It was in these years that he famously articulated the philosophy that would define Dubai's future. "My grandfather rode a camel," he would say to visitors and advisors. "My father rode a camel. I drive a Mercedes. My son drives a Land Rover. His son will drive a Land Rover, but his son will ride a camel." The message was stark and clear. The oil would not last forever. Complacency was the enemy. The wealth it generated must not be squandered on luxury and consumption, but invested strategically to build a sustainable economy that could thrive long after the last barrel of oil had been shipped. The oil was not the vision. It was the fuel for the vision. With the first oil revenues beginning to flow in 1969, Sheikh Rashid unleashed a torrent of infrastructure projects on a scale that stunned observers. His plans were not merely to improve Dubai, but to completely remake it, to build the foundations of a global city in the middle of the desert. He began by physically uniting his city. He commissioned the Al Maktoum Bridge, the first bridge across the creek, and later the Al Shindagha Tunnel, a remarkable feat of engineering that dipped beneath the busy waterway, forever connecting the twin hearts of Bur Dubai and Deira, and ending their reliance on the slow-moving Abra boats. But his ambitions stretched far beyond the banks of the creek. He ordered the construction of a new, deep-water port, Port Rashid, with state-of-the-art facilities that could handle the world's largest container ships. Yet even this was not grand enough. While Port Rashid was still under construction, Sheikh Rashid announced a project so vast, so audacious, that many of his own advisors thought he had lost his senses. He pointed to a desolate stretch of coastline some 35 kilometers, or 22 miles south of the city, a place with no people, no roads, no water, and declared that he would build the largest man-made harbor on the planet. This was to be Jebel Ali. The plan was staggering: to blast and dredge a port so massive it could accommodate an entire industrial city within its perimeter. The skeptics were vocal, dubbing the project Rashid's Folly. Why build such a gigantic port so far from the city, in the middle of nowhere, when Port Rashid was not even at capacity? But Sheikh Rashid saw a different future. He wasn't building a port for the Dubai of the 1970s. He was building a port for the globalized world of the 21st century. He knew that the future of shipping lay in supertankers and colossal container vessels that needed deep drafts and vast storage areas. And he envisioned Jebel Ali not just as a port, but as a massive industrial and logistics hub. He paired it with another revolutionary idea: the Jebel Ali Free Zone, a vast economic area where foreign companies could operate with 100% ownership, no taxes, and no currency restrictions. It was an irresistible invitation to the world's businesses. At the same time, he looked to the sky. He ordered a massive expansion of the Dubai International Airport, lengthening the runway to handle any aircraft in the world, and building a modern terminal building. And to announce Dubai's arrival on the world business stage, he commissioned the city's first true skyscraper, the Dubai World Trade Center. When it was completed in 1979, the 39-story tower, climbing 149 meters, a staggering 489 feet, stood completely alone, a solitary sentinel in the sand, miles from the traditional city center. It was a powerful, vertical statement of intent, a beacon signaling that Dubai was ready for international business. These projects were the physical embodiment of his strategy. The oil revenue was being poured directly into concrete, steel, and infrastructure, the building blocks of a diversified economy based on logistics, trade, finance, and tourism. While other oil-rich nations were investing their petrodollars in foreign stock markets, Sheikh Rashid was investing his in Dubai itself. The city became a vast construction site, the air filled with the sounds of machinery and the energy of transformation. This rapid development was powered by a massive influx of foreign labor, with workers from India, Pakistan, and Britain arriving by the thousands, laying the groundwork for the cosmopolitan, multicultural society that defines Dubai today. The discovery of oil did not make modern Dubai. Rather, it provided the critical financial accelerant that allowed Sheikh Rashid to realize a vision he had long held, a vision of a thriving global city that would one day stand on its own, long after the good fortune of the Fateh field had run dry. While Sheikh Rashid was pouring the Emirates' newfound oil wealth into the foundations of a future metropolis, a parallel and equally profound transformation was taking place in the political landscape of the region. The old world of the Trucial Coast, a collection of sleepy, independent sheikdoms under the paternalistic, but ultimately foreign, protection of Great Britain, was coming to an end. For nearly a century and a half, Britain had guaranteed the maritime peace, protecting its trade routes and keeping the ambitions of other imperial powers at bay. But by the late 1960s, the world had changed. The British Empire was contracting, and the economic cost of maintaining its military presence east of Suez was becoming untenable. In 1968, London made a stunning announcement that sent shockwaves through the palaces of the Trucial rulers. Within 3 years, by the end of 1971, all British forces would be withdrawn, and the protective treaties would be terminated. The news was met with a mixture of excitement and deep apprehension. The prospect of full independence was invigorating, but it was also terrifying. The rulers of these small, sparsely populated, and militarily weak sheikdoms were suddenly faced with the daunting task of navigating the treacherous currents of international politics on their own. The region was a tinderbox of competing interests. The Shah of Iran had territorial claims on several islands in the Gulf. Saudi Arabia had its own long-standing border disputes. To the north, the politically volatile Arab world was a maelstrom of conflicting ideologies. The fear was that without the stabilizing presence of Britain, the small, wealthy, and vulnerable emirates could be picked off one by one, their independence snuffed out before it had even truly begun. It was clear to the most forward-thinking of the rulers that survival lay not in isolation, but in unity. The only viable path forward was to band together, to pool their resources and their sovereignty to create a single, stronger nation. The chief architect and most passionate advocate for this union was the ruler of Abu Dhabi, Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan. Having become ruler in 1966, the same year Dubai found oil, Sheikh Zayed was a leader of immense wisdom and charisma, a man who commanded universal respect. As the ruler of the largest and by a vast margin wealthiest of the Emirates, he could have easily chosen to go it alone. Abu Dhabi had oil reserves on a scale that dwarfed all the others combined. It had no economic need for a federation. But Sheikh Zayed was a visionary who believed deeply in the shared history, culture, and destiny of the tribes of the region. He saw unity not as an economic calculation, but as a moral and historical imperative. Union is the path of strength, the path of honor, and the common good, he declared, a message he would repeat tirelessly. He immediately reached out to his neighbor and fellow visionary, Sheikh Rashid of Dubai. The relationship between these two men would become the bedrock of the new nation. They were different in temperament. Sheikh Zayed, the wise, paternal, desert-bred statesman. Sheikh Rashid, the dynamic, pragmatic, city-focused, merchant prince. But they were united in their ambition and their deep trust in one another. On a cold desert night in February 1968, they met at a remote camp on the border between their two emirates, a place called Argub al-Sadira. There, in the simple setting of a desert tent, over cups of coffee, these two leaders made a pact that would change the course of history. They signed an agreement, a simple document that declared their intention to merge their two emirates into a single state. And they invited the rulers of the other 5 trucial states, Sharjah, Ajman, al-Kuwain, Ras al-Khaimah, and Fujairah, along with the neighboring states of Qatar and Bahrain, to join them in forming a grand federation. This initial, hopeful vision of a 9-state union soon ran into the complex realities of post-colonial politics. Negotiations were arduous and fraught with difficulty. The smaller emirates were fearful of being dominated by the larger ones. Disputes over borders, representation, and the location of the capital city stalled progress. After 2 years of painstaking talks, it became clear that the differences were too great to overcome. Bahrain, an archipelago with a long and distinct history, and Qatar, a peninsula with growing gas wealth, each decided to pursue their own path to independence. It was a major setback, and for a moment, it seemed the entire dream of a federation might crumble. It was at this critical juncture that the partnership between Sheikh Zayed and Sheikh Rashid proved its strength. They refused to let the dream die. They decided to press ahead with a smaller, more focused federation of the 7 trucial states. Sheikh Zayed, with his immense personal prestige and the powerful leverage of Abu Dhabi's oil wealth, acted as the great conciliator, tirelessly working to reassure the smaller emirates and bridge their differences. Sheikh Rashid, ever the pragmatist, focused on the practicalities. He knew that for Dubai, a city built on global trade, being part of a larger, more stable political entity was crucial for long-term security and investor confidence. He saw that a unified nation would have a far stronger voice on the world stage and would be better able to protect the commercial interests that were so vital to his people's prosperity. Dubai's role was pivotal. As the second wealthiest and most populous emirate, its enthusiastic participation was essential for the federation to be seen as a true partnership rather than an annexation by Abu Dhabi. Sheikh Rashid's unwavering commitment to the union gave the project the critical momentum it needed. Finally, after months of intense final negotiations, a consensus was reached. A constitution was drafted, outlining a federal system that would balance the power of a central government with a significant degree of autonomy for each individual emirate. Abu Dhabi would be the capital. Sheikh Zayed would be the first president, and Sheikh Rashid would be the vice president. On the 2nd of December 1971, a date now celebrated as the nation's birthday, the rulers of 6 of the 7 emirates gathered in a modest guest house in Dubai, a building that would later be known as Union House. There, they officially signed the documents that brought the United Arab Emirates into existence. Ras Al Khaimah, which had held out due to lingering disputes, would join a few months later, completing the federation. The birth of the nation was a moment of profound significance. It was a rare and remarkable example of a peaceful, voluntary union of states in a region often defined by conflict. For Dubai, it marked the beginning of a new chapter. While it retained control over its own internal affairs, its economy, and its civic planning, its destiny was now intertwined with that of its sister emirates. Sheikh Rashid's vision for Dubai as a global hub for trade and logistics was now backed by the political stability and international legitimacy of a sovereign nation-state. The UAE passport gave its citizens and its business leaders a new standing in the world. The new federal government took responsibility for defense, foreign policy, and large-scale infrastructure, freeing Sheikh Rashid to focus his energies and Dubai's resources on the commercial and economic development that was his true passion. The partnership was symbiotic. Dubai's dynamic, trade-driven economy provided a vital engine of diversification for the new nation, while Abu Dhabi's oil wealth provided the financial security and political weight that anchored the federation. The union was not an end to Dubai's ambition, but a powerful new platform from which to launch it onto the global stage. The decision to join the UAE was perhaps the most important deal Sheikh Rashid ever struck, securing his city's future and ensuring that its remarkable journey of transformation could continue under the protection and stability of a proud and united nation. With its future secured under the stable flag of the United Arab Emirates and its coffers filled with the steady revenue from the Fateh oil field, Dubai was poised for a leap into the extraordinary. The death of Sheikh Rashid in 1990 marked the end of an era, but not the end of the vision. The mantle of leadership passed to his sons, first Sheikh Maktoum bin Rashid Al Maktoum, and then, most pivotally for the city's next chapter, Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, who became the ruler of Dubai in 2006 after being the driving force of its transformation for years as Crown Prince. Sheikh Mohammed had inherited his father's restless energy and boundless ambition, but he amplified it for a new, globalized age. He did not just want Dubai to be a successful regional port. He wanted it to be a global icon, a city that was not merely a participant in the 21st century, but one of its authors. He understood that the oil, which still provided a comfortable cushion, was a dwindling asset. The future, he believed, lay in creating a city so remarkable, so efficient, and so audacious that it would become a global magnet for talent, capital, and tourists. The strategy was no longer just about trade and logistics. It was about building a brand, a global spectacle. The transformation began with a series of bold, almost fantastical projects, each one designed not only to serve a practical purpose, but to capture the world's imagination. The first of these statements was the Burj Al Arab, the Tower of the Arabs. The brief given to the architects was simple and breathtaking in its audacity. Create a building that would become as instantly recognizable and synonymous with Dubai as the Eiffel Tower is with Paris, or the Opera House is with Sydney. The result, completed in 1999, was an icon born from the sea. Rising 321 meters, or 1,053 feet, from its own man-made island, the hotel was designed in the shape of a billowing spinnaker sail of an Arabian dhow, a tribute to the city's maritime heritage. It was a masterpiece of engineering, but it was its unapologetic opulence that made headlines. It was marketed as the world's first 7-star hotel, a category that didn't officially exist, but the label stuck. With its fleet of white Rolls-Royces, a helipad cantilevered near its summit, and interiors adorned with staggering amounts of gold leaf and rare marble, the Burj Al Arab was a declaration. It announced that Dubai was no longer competing on price and efficiency alone. It was now competing in the realm of luxury, spectacle, and unforgettable experience. This was just the beginning. Sheikh Mohammed's next move was even more audacious. A project that literally redrew the map of his own country. He envisioned creating vast new tracts of prime beachfront real estate, the most valuable land in a desert emirate. Since he couldn't create more natural coastline, he would build it. Thus began the Palm Islands projects, starting with the Palm Jumeirah. It was a concept of almost childlike simplicity and mind-boggling complexity. A man-made archipelago built in the shape of a giant palm tree, a trunk connected to 17 fronds, all encircled by a crescent-shaped breakwater. To achieve this, a Dutch dredging company was brought in to move mountains of sand, not the fine, soft sand of the nearby desert, which was unsuitable for construction, but 94 million cubic meters of sand dredged from the deep sea floor. This colossal volume of sand was then meticulously sprayed into place, its position guided by a private satellite network, providing accuracy down to the centimeter. The 11-kilometer, or nearly 7-mile, breakwater was constructed from 7 million tons of mountain rock. When it was finished, the Palm Jumeirah had added over 78 kilometers, or 48 miles, of new coastline to the city, creating the land for thousands of luxury villas and dozens of hotels. It was a project so vast it was visible from space, a stunning testament to Dubai's ability to bend nature to its will. While the coastline was being reshaped, Sheikh Mohammed turned his attention to the sky. His father's World Trade Center, once a lonely giant, was now lost in a growing forest of skyscrapers lining Sheikh Zayed Road, the 12-lane superhighway that had become the city's new central artery. But Sheikh Mohammed wanted a centerpiece, a focal point for this new downtown, a structure that would shatter all existing records for verticality. The project began under a cloak of secrecy, known simply as Burj Dubai. The goal was to create the undisputed tallest man-made structure in history. As construction progressed, the tower climbed higher and higher, its sleek, tapering design inspired by the desert lily flower, passing the height of Taipei 101, the CN Tower in Toronto, and every other claimant to the title of world's tallest. When it was finally inaugurated in 2010, it was dramatically renamed the Burj Khalifa, in honor of Sheikh Khalifa bin Zayed Al Nahyan, the ruler of Abu Dhabi and president of the UAE, who had provided crucial financial support to Dubai during the 2008 global financial crisis. The final statistics were staggering. The Burj Khalifa soared to a height of 828 meters, or 2,717 feet, more than half a mile high. It contained over 160 floors, and its observation deck at the top offered breathtaking views that stretched for nearly 100 kilometers, or over 60 miles, on a clear day. It was a vertical city, a symbol of Dubai's soaring ambition, and the ultimate global icon that Sheikh Mohammed had envisioned. Surrounding its base, a whole new district was created, featuring the Dubai Mall, one of the world's largest shopping centers, and the Dubai Fountain, a spectacular water and light show set in a vast man-made lake. These mega projects were the most visible symbols of a much deeper strategy of diversification. Dubai was systematically building a world-class infrastructure for specific, high-value service industries. Recognizing the power of aviation to connect continents, Sheikh Mohammed launched Emirates Airline in 1985 with just 2 leased aircraft. Under his aggressive leadership, it was transformed into one of the world's largest and most respected airlines, with a fleet of modern, wide-body jets. Its strategy was to turn Dubai International Airport into a global superconnector hub, leveraging the city's geographical position at the crossroads of Europe, Asia, and Africa. Millions of passengers now transit through Dubai, and the airline and airport became massive economic engines in their own right, contributing significantly to the city's GDP. Parallel to this, special economic zones, an idea pioneered at Jebel Ali, were established across the city, each tailored to a specific industry. Dubai Media City and Dubai Internet City attracted global technology and media giants like Microsoft, CNN, and Reuters, with promises of tax-free status and state-of-the-art infrastructure. The Dubai International Financial Center was created as a financial free zone, with its own independent commercial laws based on English common law, attracting major international banks and investment firms. These initiatives were designed to attract not just capital, but human talent, creating a vibrant, cosmopolitan, knowledge-based economy that could power the city's future. The Age of Wonders had arrived, transforming the desert landscape into a hyper-modern metropolis, a city that lived on the global stage, constantly innovating, constantly building, and forever reaching for the next impossibly ambitious goal. And so, our journey through the sands of time comes to a close. We have traveled from a quiet, saltwater creek, a sanctuary for Bronze Age herders and fishermen, to a glittering, futuristic metropolis that defies the very desert from which it was born. The story of Dubai is a tale of remarkable transformation, a testament to the power of human vision in the face of overwhelming odds. It is the story of the Al Maktoum dynasty, who arrived in 1833 with the audacious dream of building a city on the principles of free trade, a dream that has echoed down through generations of rulers. We have witnessed its rise as the pearl capital of the Gulf, a golden age of wealth won from the sea, and its near total collapse when that market vanished overnight. We saw a city on the brink of ruin, saved by a visionary's gamble to dredge the creek, a pivotal decision that redefined its future and cemented its identity as a global trading hub. We then felt the earth-shaking impact of the discovery of oil, not as a final prize, but as a finite fuel, a temporary gift used with breathtaking speed to build the foundations of a post-oil world. From the crucial decision to unite and form the UAE, to the creation of global icons like the Burj Al Arab and the towering Burj Khalifa, Dubai's path has been one of relentless ambition. It is a story that proves that a city's greatest resource is not what lies beneath its ground, but what resides in the imagination and determination of its people. A continuous, unfolding narrative of turning sand into gold, and a mirage in the desert into a stunning, tangible reality.